The tension was thick in the air that day. A school nurse, known for her cold and indifferent demeanor, had crossed a line that would send shockwaves through a community. It started with a seemingly innocent moment. A little boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, sat waiting for his turn in the nurse's office. His innocent face, full of curiosity and the usual childlike wonder, would soon be stained by a harsh judgment that no child should ever have to endure. The nurse looked down at him, a sneer curling at the edge of her lips. "You're dirty," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the boy to hear. "You should wash better. You don't want to smell like that, do you?" The little boy, confused and hurt, glanced up at her, unsure of what to make of her words. He had never felt this way before, never felt as though he was something to be ashamed of. Until now, it was as if this woman had cast a shadow over his self-worth, a shadow he couldn't shake. But that wasn't the end of it. What happened next would blow everyone away, including the school administration. As the father of the little boy, a man who had always believed in standing up for what was right, decided that enough was enough. Armed with nothing but his courage and a burning need for justice, he walked into the school, intent on confronting the nurse. What he didn't know was that his visit would uncover something far deeper, a secret that no one could have possibly predicted. As he made his way to the nurse's office, his thoughts raced. Was this just a careless mistake? Or was it something darker? He had heard whispers about the nurse before, things that made him uneasy. But what could he do? He had to protect his son. His heart pounded with each step he took. When he finally opened the door to the nurse's office, he was met with an unexpected sight. The nurse sitting at her desk, her expression one of surprise as she looked up. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice cool and disinterested, as though the confrontation was just another mundane part of her day. But the father wasn't there to back down. "Why did you call my son dirty?" he demanded, his voice steady but full of conviction. The nurse's eyes flickered for a moment, and for a split second, the cold exterior she wore seemed to crack. She shifted in her seat, clearly caught off guard. "I didn't mean anything by it," she began. But the father wasn't having it. He had heard enough, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. The father didn't just leave it at that. He dug deeper, demanding answers. What he found out next would leave everyone speechless. The nurse, in all her authority, was hiding a secret so shocking, it would change the way everyone saw her. No one had any idea, not even the people closest to her. As the father peeled back layer after layer, a story began to emerge, one that no one could have imagined. But the twists didn't stop there. The father's discovery was just the beginning. What would he do with this newfound knowledge? Would he expose it for the world to see? Or would he risk it all to protect the secret? The suspense was building, and everyone was waiting for the next shocking reveal. Stay tuned to find out just what the father uncovered and how it would forever change the lives of everyone involved. What happens next is something you won't want to miss. As the father, Michael, sat across from the nurse, his mind was racing. His son, Jason, had never seemed like the type to get into trouble. He was a quiet boy, gentle and shy, always trying to make friends, but never quite fitting in with the other kids. He wasn't the sort to cause problems, but what had happened that morning didn't sit right with him. Michael had always prided himself on being a father who cared deeply about his child's well-being. He wasn't the kind of man to let something slide if it wasn't right. And this wasn't right. As Michael sat in the nurse's office, trying to make sense of the situation, he noticed something strange in the nurse's eyes. For a split second, her cold demeanor faltered. There was a flash of something, guilt, fear, maybe even shame. but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual icy stare. Michael wasn't fooled. He wasn't here to play games. He was there to protect his son, no matter what. "Why don't you tell me the real reason you said that to my son?" he asked again, his voice steady, but now tinged with an edge. "What's really going on here?" The nurse stiffened, but for the first time, Michael saw a crack in her armor. She shifted uneasily, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. I didn't mean it like that," she muttered. But the hesitation in her voice wasn't convincing. Michael knew she was hiding something. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "I'm not leaving until I get the truth," he said, his words firm, unyielding. "You owe it to Jason, and you owe it to me." The room grew heavy with silence, each second stretching out longer than the last. Finally, the nurse sighed, her shoulders slumping. "All right," she said quietly. "You want the truth. The truth is, I wasn't talking about your son." Her voice broke as she continued, her gaze falling to the floor. "I was talking about another child, one I've been keeping an eye on for a while, but I didn't think anyone would notice. I didn't want anyone to know." Michael was taken aback. The nurse's words didn't make sense. "What are you talking about?" he asked, confusion creeping into his voice. The nurse paused, clearly, weighing whether to continue. But something about Michael's determination made her finally speak. "It's about Jason's classmate. The one who's always dirty, always showing up to school with torn clothes, food stains on his face. Everyone knows about him, but no one talks about it. I thought your son was the one acting out because he hangs out with him. That's why I said what I said." Michael's heart sank. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit, but they painted a picture he wasn't prepared for. Jason, his quiet, sweet boy, had been unfairly lumped in with someone else, a child who had a reputation for being neglected, misunderstood, and now the nurse had used that reputation to judge Jason, to hurt him in the worst way possible. But that wasn't the worst part. As the nurse continued, her voice shaking, she revealed something even more shocking. "I've been watching that boy, and I know his secret. He's been living in a shelter with his single mother. They don't have much. They don't fit in here. But I couldn't stand how the other kids treated him, so I started to isolate him more. I thought if I made an example of him, the others might leave him alone. But I made a huge mistake, and it's too late now." Michael's mind was spinning. The boy the nurse had referred to, the one who had been neglected and ostracized by others, had been caught in a cycle of isolation, even by the very adults who were supposed to care for him. And it was his own son who had been dragged into the middle of it all. Michael stood up, his fists clenched at his sides, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was wrong, all of it. The way the nurse had treated his son, the way she had allowed her own biases to shape her actions. But there was something else, something Michael couldn't ignore. The boy, the one who had been cast aside, needed help. He couldn't change the past, but he could make a difference now. "I'm reporting this," Michael said, his voice firm. "What you've done is unforgivable, and if you think you can get away with it, you're wrong." The nurse looked up at him, her face pale and strained. "Please, don't. I've made a mistake, but I can't lose my job. I can't lose everything." Michael's expression softened just slightly. "You already did when you hurt a child, but you can make this right. You still have a chance to do better." Later that afternoon, Michael made his way to the shelter where the boy lived. He knocked on the door, and when the boy's mother answered, she looked as though she hadn't expected anyone to come. Michael introduced himself and explained what had happened at school, how the nurse had mistreated both their children. As the boy's mother listened, her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't known the depth of the hurt her son had been going through. It wasn't an easy road, but Michael promised that he would stand by them both. He would help ensure that the boy would never be left behind again. The nurse had lost her job, but in her failure, she had brought to light something far greater, a community's responsibility to each other, to show kindness and understanding, rather than judgment. As for Jason, the wound of being called dirty was healing, but Michael knew that the emotional scars would take longer to fade, but they would. With love, support, and the strength of family, they would heal. The lesson was clear. Every child, no matter their background, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. No one should ever feel ashamed of who they are or where they come from. The story of Jason, his new friend from the shelter, and their families was one of struggle, but also of redemption. It was a story that would leave a lasting impact on everyone who heard it. Michael couldn't change the past, but he could be a part of the future, and that was enough.